All right, is the mic on? Can you hear me? Yes? No? I know, I'll bring it closer. That's better, isn't it? Okay, yay, okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
And welcome to a year-long series of events celebrating the 10th anniversary of the installation of the Italian Baroque organ in the fountain court of the Memorial Art Gallery. My name is Honey McConey, and I'm Chair and Professor of Music in the College Music Department, Professor of Musicology at the Eastman School of Music, and Faculty Lead for the 10th anniversary celebrations. I'd like to note three things in my welcoming remarks. The first is a thank you to those who have so generously supported these anniversary events. First and foremost, the Humanities Project Office of the University of Rochester College of Arts, Science, and Engineering, our primary benefactor, but also the Memorial Art Gallery, the Eastman School of Music, and two departments therein, the Department of Organ, Sacred Music, and Historical Keyboard Instruments, and the Department of Musicology, and four departments of the College of Arts, Science, and Engineering, Art and Art History, Religion and Classics, History, and Music. And many individuals helped as well, including, and this is by no means a complete list, Nancy Norwood, David Higgs, Eduardo Bellotti, Nathan Lauba, Stephen Kennedy, the wonderful communications professionals of the Memorial Art Gallery, Eastman and the college, and especially the amazing Naomi Gregory. Naomi, could you stand up so we can admire you and clap and all this stuff? The second is to note how the organ serves not just as an instrument that produces music, but also as a symbol, metaphor, and catalyst for exploring art, history, culture, and performance. This year, it's a jumping-off point for discussing another anniversary, the publication of Frescobaldi's path-breaking Primo Libro di Cantate of 1615, for examining the role of music and the Jesuits in the New World, for understanding intonation, improvisation, and performance practice. Eastman's organ students will benefit from masterclasses with featured performers, but we have special programs as well for members of the University of Rochester Chamber Orchestra, college students of music theory, and undergraduates in history, religion and classics, and art history. This year's events were designed to demonstrate that our Italian Baroque organ is a window into many worlds. And lastly, I would like to pay a personal tribute to organists. First, as a musicologist, I would like to observe that every organist is a musicologist as well. And I can think of no higher words of praise. That's a joke, laugh. Because every organ is unique and requires for performance an understanding of the historical milieu that generated it and a comprehension of what music is best suited for it. This knowledge comes through research and scholarship, the tools of musicology. But that's just the first step before the organist performs. And organists are complete musicians in the way that no others are today. Organists do not simply play the notes as well as possible, as all musicians do. They improvise, they transpose, they read old clefs, they realize figured bass, they read scores, they arrange, they accompany, they vamp, they direct choirs, they switch seamlessly between performing as concert artists and guiding a congregation through the intricacies of liturgy. They provide the soundtrack to the joy of weddings and the solemnity of funerals. Every organist is a kind of mini J.S. Bach in their versatility and skill. We celebrate one specific organ this year, but we also celebrate the community of organists who add so much to our lives. So a huge personal thank you to all of you organists. I would like to turn now to a great supporter of Eastman's Department of Organ, Sacred Music, and Historical Keyboards, the Joan and Martin Messenger Dean of the Eastman School of Music, Jamal Rossi.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's very interesting to me that we're here to celebrate an organ. I feel like we're almost in church. Everybody's at the back of the house, so it somehow seems appropriate. So the Italian Baroque organ is not only a beautiful object in itself and a highlight of the Memorial Art Gallery's collection, it's also, I believe, a living demonstration of one of the things that I think makes Eastman a very special place. And that is the interaction of outstanding musical scholarship and outstanding musical performance. And I think this is summed up very well by the title of the weekend, Performing History, the Italian Baroque Organ and its Cultural Intersections. This instrument that we're going to celebrate this weekend has a long history of its own. And it was one of the earliest and most important projects in the Eastman Rochester Organ Initiative, or EROI. In the summer of 2005, The organ arrived in Rochester from Lithuania. I would tell you the same day that I arrived from South Carolina. And although it didn't arrive as a whole, it came in various pieces: pipes, bellows, keyboard, fascinating and decorative woodwork, and many painted details. Hans Davidson and a team of workers spent several months reassembling this treasure in all of its exquisite detail. When they finished in the early fall, Eastman became the only place in North America where one could give or hear historically informed performances of 18th century organ music on the kind of large Italian instrument for which it was written. David Higgs summed it up when he described the Italian Baroque organ shortly after its installation as, quote, "a living, breathing, singing work of art," end quote. Over the last decade, this instrument has breathed and sung in the hands of Eastman organists and organists from around the world, and it has given pleasure to listeners of the gallery, patrons, and it has remained a beautiful symbol of the great things that can be accomplished when different departments of our university work together. This 4-day festival that we're about to launch is actually the start of a year-long humanities project titled Performing History, the Italian Baroque Organ and its Cultural Intersections. And it celebrates the importance and influence of the Italian Baroque organ and its repertoire in various historical and cultural contexts. I think this humanities project, again, the idea of multiple departments across campus working together, is one of the things that makes this university special. The festival offerings in the next 3 days include 7 concerts, 2 masterclasses, 2 paper sessions by 8 presenters, 15 different organists, and we are delighted to welcome visiting performers and presenters from Italy, Sweden, and the USA, in addition to our own faculty members from Eastman, and as well as the School of Arts and Sciences, and together with Nancy Norwood, the MAG's Curator of European Art. I'd like to acknowledge and thank several people. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Hans Davidson, David Higgs, and Bill Porter, who shared a vision for the Eastman Rochester Organ Initiative and has made a dream really a reality that has changed the nature of Rochester and the Eastman School of Music, and I think that has brought worldwide recognition to this project. I'd like to thank Nancy Norwood, who is the Curator of European Art at the MAG, and she has been a key partner throughout the entire history of this project. I'd like to thank Jonathan Binstock and Grant Holcomb, both of whom have been very enthusiastic supporters of this unique partnership. I want to thank again David Higgs, Nathan Lauba, and Eduardo Bellotti, our organ faculty today, who bring this organ to life in so many ways and create wonderful music for our community. And finally, I want to thank the university's Humanities Center, and particularly Honey McConey for her leadership and all they have done to make this weekend of concerts, masterclasses, and paper presentations possible. I hope you enjoy a fantastic weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. We will now hear from someone who actually knows how to play the organ. Professor of Organ, Chair of the Department of Organ, Sacred Music, and Historical Keyboards, and internationally renowned organ virtuoso, David Higgs.
Thanks very much. I had a little piece of paper of the things I wanted to say written on here, but Honey and Dean Rossi have already said all of those things. So rather than take the time up with inanities that might come out of my mouth as I extemporize, I think it's better for me to sit down and let the evening progress with the next thing, and we are really waiting for Nancy Norwood's lecture. But Honey, if you would come back and do another introduction. All I can say is we are so grateful that this organ is here. Hans Davidson, who was our project director for the Eroy project, will be here not until tomorrow night because he's running another festival in Sweden tonight. And he's leaving right before that's over tomorrow morning. And but I remember him always saying, if you want to make friends, build an organ. And that has happened. We've made so many friends, and across disciplines, across various métiers of art, And this instrument has been at the locus of all of that. This week, you'll get to hear many of those things when we especially hear how the organ works with Baroque instruments and voices on Saturday night. That's a very special treat, and it is one of the jobs that this organ would have done every day in its home in Italy. So we get to hear this instrument, and tomorrow night we'll hear it with singers in the madrigal program. So we can't think of this organ just as a solo instrument, but we have to think of it how it works with other orchestral instruments and with voices, and how it blends its voice with them in a very special way. So you're in for a treat this week and this year.
Thank you, David. This is very short because we are all eager to hear what happens next. The person I'm about to bring up on stage falls into the sine qua non category, and I'm sure you all studied Latin in junior high school. That means without which not. This could not have happened without her work. The organ is a jewel of an instrument, but every jewel needs a setting. The magical setting that the organ is in is the result of a specific vision of, and I mean the visual component as opposed to the vision of bringing this here, of the Memorial Art Gallery's Curator of European Art, a tireless supporter of the integration of music and art, and our keynote speaker. Please welcome Nancy Norwood.
Well, I just got very embarrassed, so can you hear me? Am I good on that? Okay. I really can't believe that we're here tonight. I can't believe it's been 10 years. And I'm just trying to figure out where to start because I know I have to cut some of the time off of my lecture as part of it. Much of this talk is going to be personal, and what I'd like to do, rather than, I can't really speak to the organ as much as I love living with it for the last 10 years. Many people know much more than I do. I've decided not to really speak about the art in the Fountain Court with this lecture. That's a whole different topic of conversation. But what I would like to do is give you some background as to this collaboration. I'd like to give you some background to the relationship between Eastman and the Memorial Art Gallery. And I'd like to talk about the organ's arrival here. How did it get here? Was it a logical extension of something that we already strove to do? Was it part of our mission? And then finally, what I'd really like to talk about is the impact of the collaboration between MAG and Eastman in terms of the Italian Baroque organ, but also in the bigger sense. We now work with Eastman fairly regularly on a variety of projects, and I'd like to speak to those as well. And our relationships are very intertwined now. We're both part of we're both divisions of the University of Rochester, but because of the Italian Baroque organ, we're much more tightly linked than we ever were in the past. And then I'd also like to just end with a couple of thoughts about what the possibilities might be in the future. So some of this is going to be pretty personal, but when our director, Grant Holcomb, in October 2001, so it wasn't 2005 that this started for me, it was 2001, when he told me that an organ was in the offing for the Fountain Court, I became very worried, and I was not the advocate that was mentioned just a few minutes ago. I was not the tireless advocate of the organ. I was actually the greatest doubter of what the effects would be. For example, what about sound vibration on works of art? What about the showcase, the Fountain Court of MAG's second floor galleries? Was it going to be completely subservient to the organ? Was it going to be a concert hall? And then there were all the practical things. Could the floor bear the instrument's weight? And where would the bellows go? And would the wind trunk reach? How are we going to do that? Are we going to cut holes in walls? Yes, we did. We did do that. And there were so many questions, and I was apprehensive. I was a pretty inexperienced curator, so I actually voiced those apprehensions to our director, who said, Nancy, it's going to happen. Do it well. And so that was a moment, because for those of you who know Grant Holcomb, that's a major thing for him to say. He's from Southern California, and he's usually pretty low-key on things. So, but I'm really grateful that all of my alarmist things are notions did not come to pass, and I did become one of the project's really great advocates. But really, there is no project like this that happens without vision and without leadership. And that's true in the past as well as for this project in the future. We're part of the University of Rochester, as I said, but we were actually founded as part of MAG history. We were founded by a woman named Emily Sibley Watson, who founded the gallery. The reason it's called a Memorial Art Gallery is she founded it in memory of her son, who passed away in his 20s. And if you look at the statue on the second floor, it's a statue of memory. And so that's sort of where that comes from. But Emily Sibley Watson founded the museum for the people of the city of Rochester, and was to be held in trust by the University of Rochester for those people. So from our beginnings, we were really both a civic community and university art museum. So we actually have two boards. We have the university and we have our own board. We really straddle this line, and it's really informed our history, and it informs the kind of outreach we practice, the kind of museum we are. But the leadership, we've been very fortunate in our leaders, and I want to speak to this vision of our leaders. This, on the left, is George Hurdle, who was our founding director. In 1913, the museum turned 100 years old 2 years ago. And then in a way that could never happen today, because it's complete nepotism, total and complete nepotism, he had two daughters, and Gertrude and Isabel Hurdle. And between these three people, they maintained really the, you could call it the power, but it was also the mission of this museum well into the 70s. Gertrude, on the right, was the director from the time of her father's death in 1922 until 1962, so that makes Grant Holcomb's 29-year tenure look sort of pale in comparison. And then on the left is Isabel Hurdle, who was the assistant director for 40 years as well, from 32 to 72. So between these three people, and in particularly with these two women, the MAG really became a center for community, and it had a single vision and a singular vision for a very long time. And part of that vision included the Fountain Court, which was the addition paid for by Emily Sibley Watson in 1926. This just shows the construction of the Fountain Court, and I have these red notes, but I'm just going to talk to the slides. I think that's more entertaining. I hope so anyway. It was designed by McKim, Mead & White Architects. It was an enormous project. It was intended as sort of the gem of the new edition in 1926. And as you know, there's the original 13 building, the Fountain Court's in the center, and it's surrounded by side galleries. There are all sorts of sort of machinations as to how those side galleries were going to look. But the Fountain Court was always intended to be what it is. It was intended to be not only an exhibition space for art, it was intended to be a community gathering space, it was intended to be an education space, and it was also intended to be a space for music. Just from this construction drawing, if you look at the tiles, and you can see them upstairs when you're up there, those are made of a material called zenitherm, which is a man-made fabricated acoustic tile, which is why the acoustics are what they are, is because of the tile. I just wanted to show you a few historic photos because I think you learn a lot from them. This is the inaugural exhibition in 1926. Obviously, there was really no art in the Fountain Court at that time, but there were a lot of plants. This is not something we would do today. But it sort of gives an idea of, I think, the intent of that space, which was a community space. It was a space to be and to be present. This is how it looked in the 1930s. Again, there was an enormous push for acquiring medieval and Renaissance art. You can see on either wall there are two tapestries. These were the days when plaster casts were considered art, and we had a great collection of plaster casts, including the tympanum of Chartres Cathedral, which is on the north wall. And when you're up there, if you look, there's a sort of a slight discoloration that goes into an arch form. And that would be from this plaster cast. So that plaster cast is where the organ is today. There were also community events. There was also a lot of art education that went up there, including modeling classes with live animals. Also not something we do today, but there are people who, well, when I got here, I've been here 15 years now, and when I came, there were still people alive who remembered doing this when they were children. So it always became a little difficult to tell them that the rules had changed, not just for animals, but for many, many other things, as the organ department can attest to from our workings. And finally, the thing that was really a love of, and I think a love of Rochester, but a love of the Hurdle Sisters was music, and music of all sorts. And so the Fountain Court, I mean, before fire codes, because there's no way we can do this now, but if you really, it was a very, very vibrant living place, and it was filled with music a lot of the time. So, you know, that's really the history we have of the space. It's also, of course, an art space. The thing about what I wanted to talk about with leaders and visionary leaders, you know, you mentioned it, they mentioned it in their introduction, but Grant Holcomb, who was our director until just last year, the one who told me I should make it happen well, and then Hans Davidson, and he was the project director, as David said, for EROY, and he's on the left. And this is, I don't think either of them would like this picture very much, but I took it on the day we were actually unwrapping all of the crates for the organ, and it was a very intense time, as you can imagine, and that was an intense photo, and I've saved it. I've always liked it a lot. But it was really sort of fast-forwarding up to 2005, and the installation of the organ. It's really, these are the two people I think of. There were so many people involved, I mean, in the whole thing, and mechanics and everything else, but these two people, without them, I don't know that it would have happened. I think it would have happened, I just don't know that it would have happened as well. And so I think we all need to be very grateful to both of them. These are just a few. This is the day you saw them if you were in the auditorium watching the loop. This is the day they arrived. It was uncrated. And the scaffolding at the end, it was an incredibly complicated thing that I can't even begin to describe, but a platform had to be erected. All of these things had to be measured out with engineers and with, it was just incredible. But the really sort of awe-inspiring moment, and the way all of the hassles that had gone on in these weekly meetings for 2 years sort of went away, was seeing this all come together. And I don't know how many of you have seen this time lapse, but I don't really have time to show you all of them, but this is on Eastman's website. And can you turn up the volume? Isn't that cool? I didn't do that. I remember when and I think the people who were at the 2005 inauguration will remember too, they showed that in the first concert, with all of the speeches. And I remember the university architect at the time leaned over to the head of facilities, because I don't know if you saw the light go across. That light is to a curator a nightmare. And I tried and tried for so many years to get those windows replaced. And because of the organ, those windows are now sort of shadowed, and we have good light levels in that space for the first time. So the university architect leaned over to the head of facilities when the light just sort of traced and passed, and he said, "Not anymore." And I was very happy about that. So with that time lapse and the beautiful music that David was hooked to that time lapse. I'm just going to show you a few photographs of the inaugural concerts. This is all in October 2005. We included, this was a really fantastic part. Now I don't really worry about it, but I will say that in October 2005, when we were going to put dancers in the fountain court, we've all come a long way in 10 years, I think. It was absolutely beautiful, though. It was for me really very awe-inspiring, the whole event. So the whole thing is that, really you look at the lower picture and you look at, again, we don't eat or have candles in the fountain court like we did in 1964, but the spirit is there. You can have an empty space. I meant to take that out. You can have an empty space. You can have a gallery filled with art with no people. That's what it is. And it can be extremely beautiful, but if there's not a conversation, our new director, Jonathan Binstock, talks about wanting MAG to be a place for conversation, where people interact, people convert, new conversations start. And I think that the fountain court, for me, is really a place that people talk about how beautiful it is in an isolated way with the art and with the organ, but I really believe that without the people hearing the organ or seeing the art, it's sort of, so what? So that was really the effort we made. That's part of the effort and part of the mission of MAG and part of the legacy of MAG and part of what we're continuing for today. Are continuing toward. So the thing about the reinstallation was, as I mentioned, my great concerns were that the organ would overwhelm. So if you can imagine the organ there and all of those little things surrounded, I think you can kind of see why I was concerned. And I think we also really wanted a place that would be easy to deal with. This was a practical thing. If we had had different columns with sculpture on them, we would have had to stanch them off. It would have been unattractive. It would have been a not very nice place to be, to listen to beautiful music. So we tried to really figure out the best way for everyone to have the organ come here, to have the installation done. And what we decided was a very large team of people here. It wasn't me by myself at all. In fact, I was probably a little resistant to moving the medieval art out of the fountain court, which is the original intent, being a fairly rigid person sometimes. But with the Baroque, what we decided in the end was, because of the nature of Baroque art and music, this sort of completely really interesting intertwined, the more I'm around, the more I realize every musical and visual art of any period, there is this kind of interrelationship. But that was a real learning experience for me. But we decided to install our Italian and Italianate Baroque art in the same space, and lots of work by lots of people went on in that, and it was just incredibly successful. And I think there's really not another place that I know of where you can listen to Baroque art, and listen to Baroque music, and in the setting of Baroque art. And really, it's just an extraordinary thing. So it all worked to everyone's great advantage. I'm not going to talk too much about the art, but one thing I did want to show, one of the great things that happened at the same time this inauguration, the organ was going on, was we bought, to my mind, what was one of our great acquisitions, which, and since I've been here anyway, which is this altarpiece by the Italian artist Luca Giordano. We didn't really have any sort of we couldn't buy a Caravaggio. Nobody can buy a Caravaggio anymore, but we found the next best thing that was affordable, and it's just extraordinary in the space, and it was almost as hard to install as the organ was, because if you look at the team, there's chains and all of that, because what's behind the xenotherm is just furring strips. There's not like plywood behind those walls. So it was a tricky thing, but I think well worth it. I'm going to make sure I got... So what I'd like to talk about now, we've all survived the organ. We've survived 10 years. We still have concerts. We still have the wonderful Sunday going for Baroque or whatever, the mini concerts we have students practicing all the time. When the organ came, that's what we had in mind, all of us. It was for students, it was for the public, it was concerts. But what I have found so exciting is that we were actually able to sort of forge ahead with other collaborative efforts, and some with the organ, some not with the organ. One was this CD that is, shamelessly I will say, available in the gallery store. It's Eduardo Bellotti, and I wrote the little program notes for the paintings. Eduardo wrote fantastic program notes for the recordings. And it was when we did this CD, it sort of started the night of the inauguration, where we, or at least during that process, we were like, hey, we should do something else. This was so great, you know, all of the worry is gone. And so we started talking about pictures in an exhibition, which is one of the only things I know in terms of music, art, kind of relationships. And then it came to happen in 2006. So it's a wonderful recording. I hope that if you don't have it, you will eventually have it in some way, form or way. And there were two paintings that Eduardo included that speak to me personally, that they're two of my favorite pictures. And one of them is the Giordano. And with the piece Eduardo paired it with, it's for the Elevatio, which is the death of Christ during the Mass. And it speaks to the same thing, to those feelings, to that sort of dark sensibility in a rhetorical way that in a way is the same that you have with the painting. Different rhetoric, different style, but it's the same root, I think, that the music is and the painting is. And it's really the first time that I started thinking about how intertwined, interdependent these musical and visual arts were in the Renaissance. I mean, you can talk about Baroque art, Baroque music, and all fine and good, but when you really start feeling it and thinking about it, it becomes a much more powerful thing. And one thing that I love about this painting very, very much, which is different, there are several that Giordano did of the Entombment, but the one I like the most about this is the figures in the background, because what he's doing with these figures, especially these sort of shadowy, distant figures who are talking to each other, they're in conversation with each other. We don't know who they are, they're not Nicodemus, they're not Joseph of Arimathea, they're not the Virgin, they're not the Magdalene. They are just like you and me, witnesses to this event, much as a believer is witness at the Mass. And I think that to me that pulling of the viewer into the painting, where you're actually present at the death, it speaks so much to Counter-Reformation theology and to what Baroque art was trying to do, and I think what Baroque music was doing as well in terms of Counter-Reformation music. The second painting that Eduardo chose for the Promenade CD is one of my favorite paintings in the entire collection, which is by Alessandro Magnasco, The Exorcism of the Waves, and he paired it with the Vivaldi Concerto the Night, and it's this whole idea of nature. And again, when it wasn't really until I read Eduardo's notes that I realized how strong these parallels could be, because that's exactly what, you know, the concerto, I know the painting, and they're really doing the same thing. It's all about sort of that uncontrolled, unleashed power of nature, the unpredictability of it, and that sort of fantastical, almost hallucinogenic, at least in terms of the painting there is. So these were two very important things for me in terms of working with the Eastman faculty and really learning a little bit more and going a little bit deeper. Then meanwhile, this is not an organ initiative. This is a group called Sound Exchange. Some of you probably are in Sound Exchange. But they first performed here. This was actually their first performance. I think they're very exciting. They're really looking at ways to combine the arts and the musical arts and the visual arts in new offerings and new compositions and community outreach, and really doing what we try to do, but in a bigger way, because they go out places. And we were one of their first experiments. This is just an example. In the Impressionist Gallery, it was during their first performance here. It was an evening of Debussy, and was very successful with different performances. And then there were these original compositions where they could choose works of art. This was to Jacobs Lawrence Summerstein in Harlem, which is in the American Galleries. And then this was a wonderful thing in a special exhibition of memory with these floating, they were floating pieces of paper, and the composition sort of mirrored that. That's a collaboration that has continued, and one that I find extremely fulfilling for our community, for us. It really lends new meaning in a lot of ways to the works of art, to have these young musicians, not just sort of, someone said, I think this conference, Michael Anderson and I gave a paper, they were talking about sort of it being innovative to give a concert in front of a work of art of the same period. And I've sort of reached this point where I think, but that's not innovative. What we do is innovative. You know, what Eastman does here is innovative. And I really think the more I see elsewhere in museums, I think this is something really very, very special to all of us. Another collaboration that, you know, I shamelessly used the people I know now from Eastman School of Music to work on this project. This is Renaissance Remix, which is just across the hall in the Gill Center. One of the sections of that is on music, and the work of art we have in there is on the top, it's separated from its instrument, but it was the interior lid of a virginal from about 1500. And you know, it was after a print. It's a great work of art on its own in terms of thinking about north-south, things like that. And then the two instruments, the rebec and the lute, are actually reproduction instruments, but very, very true. They're made by an instrument maker here in Rochester. And what we were really trying to do was figure out how do we, because the audience, the intended audience for Renaissance Remix is really middle school and up. It's much more interactive space, but what we were having a hard time with was how do we how do we encourage a middle school aged person to really care at all about early music? We could do a lecture, we could explain things, but that's not going to make them care at all. So what we did, we have a computer interactive in there, and the exhibition's divided into themes, and then we have an interactive component for each of those, which is My World, Your World. And the one for music, the My World is actually the world of the boy in the portrait, which is the centerpiece of the exhibition. And that is this fake historical narrative I wrote for each theme. And the second one is Your World. And that is someone speaking from a personal perspective, not a scholar lecturing, but someone who does these things. For example, for the armor section, we actually interviewed an armorer who still makes armor in the Renaissance style. He lives in Long Island, and he does a great job. And he agreed to interview with us. Well, for the music, I'm just going to play very short clips from these, but I wanted you to see what we were, no, that's not right. So this is something I wrote. It's the very famous virginal maker in Antwerp.
My name is Hans Ruckers. I was born in the 1540s in the Flemish town of Mechelen, near Antwerp. I founded one of the greatest dynasties of instrument makers in Flanders. I'm best known for the creation of luxury harpsichords and virginals, types of keyboard instruments that became very popular because they were perfect for playing the polyphonic or many-voiced compositions of the Renaissance. People from all walks of life listened to and played music during my time, which is the main reason our business was so successful. Small instruments like my virginals were especially...
So that was My World. And even though Hans Ruckers did not probably make the virginal, we have no idea who would have. You know, it's not a leap to talk about this person who really existed, have that person speak in their voice. You know, I mean, Antwerp's really important. I can't put Antwerp in the exhibition, but I can do it through this video, so it's an outlet. And then this is our very own Stephen Kennedy, who agreed to be interviewed and to play the organ. There we go. And this is why it matters, is really the question.
We can sit at this organ and play this organ just as someone probably did 300 years ago. So if I place my finger on one of these keys, I'm reliving an event that happened perhaps 300 years ago. One of the things that I think is so powerful about looking at old music and recreating it is that we're doing it right now with our bodies, and we are entering into another time when we do it. But I think in the Renaissance, it would have been a very different way that people thought about music because it was part of everyone's life.
So the idea was to have these my world, your world sort of parallel each other to some extent, with the key thing being music was everywhere, music was for everyone, it was all walks of life. And so we were really able, I think, to integrate that. And then another collaboration, one of the more recent ones in 2013, was just really serendipitous. I mean, now we all know each other, 2005, 2013, so pretty much the people who come over here, we talk and you get to know other things about them. And so we were in the process, I received money to reinstall our medieval collection, which you may have seen was in the Fountain Court in 2004 or 5. Was pulled out of the Fountain Court and sort of put in a really sad way. And since I'm a medievalist, it was even sadder that our medieval collection was displayed in such a terrible way. But we finally got money to reinstall it. And at the same time, Michael Anderson, a musicologist whom I'm sure you all know at Eastman, was looking for a partner. And we applied for funding from the provost, university provost, for a project called Medieval Sights and Sounds. And what we did with music and art sort of paralleled in a way it was reversed because the organ coming forced the reinstallation of the Fountain Court. The reinstallation of the medieval gallery is really what encouraged this project, Medieval Sights and Sounds. So there's the before, the sad medieval gallery on the left, and then on the right is the reinstallation. And what we did was we really looked at, and Michael came into this project sort of at the end. We had already talked about it, but fortunately he didn't come too far into the end, so we could actually work together on a lot of these themes. Since we don't have an encyclopedic collection of medieval art, we decided to sort of do it thematically without being silly. So one of them, like on the top left, I called it Fragments of Time. It's all architectural fragments. It's sort of pushing the issue that medieval art is not intended to be in a museum, that most of the things that we have in a museum are part of something much, much larger. And in the case of the top left, it's the architectural. On the right, top right is the liturgical section, so the public church. On the lower left is private life, so there's a lot of sort of secular devotional work. And then on the lower right, is the lives of saints, and that important because most of them, they were part of altarpieces or they're fragments of larger works, but it really allows sort of insight into the importance of the role of the saint in the medieval and Renaissance world. And so we took these 4 themes, and Michael had a lot of music that he wanted to record, and we actually paired it all up, sort of. And then we created this kiosk that we had a switch put on, so when there was an organ concert, it wasn't playing at the same time. So I hope that works when I have the security people flip it off during organ concerts. But anyway, it's a video kiosk. It's below that lovely leaf of the Antiphonary in the medieval gallery. And I'm just going to play you one clip. So there are 4. On the kiosk, you can see there's St. Sebastian on the left, so you have the lives of saints, you have the life of the Virgin, so in private devotional world, you have the liturgy, and then there's sort of an introduction. And I wanted to play, this is not, Michael would hate it if I played this section, but he's not here. He's in Chicago.
And the Salve Regina was probably
just shows
the
kind of what
most
we were trying to
important
do.
Expression of devotion to the Virgin, which today it's known as a prayer, but in the late Middle Ages was a melody that was sung daily for at least half of the year in monasteries and convents and in court chapels.
So you prayed to her for specific things. A lot of women prayed to the Virgin for help with childbirth or fertility.
Sometimes we look at texts and we think that they're sort of messy and difficult to understand, incomprehensible, and arcane in a way. But actually, these were popular texts that were not necessarily reserved for a few learned people, but were kind of lingua franca, common usage. Even to peasantry would understand simple phrases in Latin that became the basis for large musical works.
The small statues of the Virgin and Child were very, very common. People had those with them at all times. But it was common knowledge that these should be beautiful because they were in service to God and to the greater faith.
So what we were trying to do in a similar way to the Fountain Court is all of the photographs of those works of art, they're works of art that are in the gallery. And we tried to make them, we tried to contextualize them to some extent, but we also Michael talked about music, I talked about art, and we tried to bring them together to where there wasn't this division. It was easier maybe with the liturgical works, with the paten and the chalice, but all of it could work really that way. And again, I think this project really did stem from that early relationship with Eastman in 2005. There are other collaborations. We didn't really collaborate, we were just the venue, but I just loved this, the Organ and Film Festival, and Eduardo performed here. I also saw the one at Christchurch downtown, the Joan of Arc, and it was fantastic, which of course made me start thinking about other collaborative possibilities. And so, you know, we've had all of these things now, and there's just so many options that it's almost overwhelming to think about what they are. So I was thinking of a couple that I would like to see happen. Anybody who wants to talk to me, that would be great. We really haven't finished the 17th century. We haven't really done the North. We have a wonderful gallery we have Rembrandt, we have Teniers, we have genre scenes, we have still life. You know, I would like to know how we can work with those together. How can we bring Italy and the North together? We have them in two different galleries, but they're not really, you know, when you think about it. So that's one project I would really like to see, and I'd like to see someone fund that. These are the two paintings on the left is Teniers. So you get sort of this art, you know, music of the people and like you had in art. And then just a question, I was thinking about it today, is there an equivalent in Baroque music for the still life, for the memento mori? I'm sure there is, not necessarily an illustration, but is there conceptually, like we have with the elevatio and the sort of human, the psychological components of Baroque art and music, do we have that with the memento mori in the North, with Dutch art? I don't know. I rely on you for that. And then sort of jumping ahead to something really different, I was reading about Leger. This is our Leger in the Impressionist early 20th century gallery adjacent to the Fountain Court. And I realized, I was looking at it in the context. I don't know how many of you know that for the very first time in history, every Eastman School of Music freshman is going to come over here at the same time. And we're doing a whole guide. This is an initiative of John Haynes, and it's fantastic. And that's going to be in November. But I was looking at art that, you know, just to kind of talk about it, and I don't think we're going to do this one, but when I was looking at it, I thought, gosh, it's 1924. That's the same time that Leger directed and conceived of the Ballet Mécanique, which is one of the great works of experimental cinema in 1924. And so I started thinking, well, I look at this and I see dissonance and I see this fragmentation that happens in film and music and everything at the time. Can't we do so? I'm not saying the organ, people, I don't want to overwhelm anybody. Naomi suggested I might if I brought up the Leger in terms of the organ, but I think in the larger picture of Eastman, I think it'd be really fun to do something with that. So that's just, I keep thinking there are all of these options, and but it all started with the installation of this wonderful instrument in the Fountain Court. But I think it's important, as I said earlier, to remember that the instrument and the art are really meaningless without the people seeing and hearing them. So thank you for having me speak tonight. I've really been honored. I'm getting really weepy, but I've been so honored the last 10 years to work with all of you. And I look forward to another, maybe not 10, but, well, I mean, you'll be here forever. So, thank you.
thank you, Nancy, for this wonderfully rich presentation, both your discussion of the project, its initial stages, your apprehensions, what happened, and those wonderful pictures, weren't they amazing? The historic pictures of the Fountain Court and the whole history of the vision of that space was really, really fascinating. Thank you. And also for such a rich exposition of this topic of music and art and how we can work together in the art gallery. So we please thank Nancy one more time. Thank you.
Installation as, quote, a living, breathing, singing work of art, end quote. Over the last decade, this instrument has breathed and sung in the hands of Eastman organists and organists from around the world, and it has given pleasure to listeners of the gallery, patrons, and it has remained a beautiful symbol of the great things that can be accomplished when different departments of our university work together. This 4-day festival that we're about to launch is actually the start of a year-long humanities project titled Performing History, the Italian Baroque Organ and its Cultural Intersections. And it celebrates the importance and influence of the Italian Baroque organ and its repertoire in various historical and cultural contexts. I think this humanities project, again, the idea of multiple departments across campus working together is one of the things that makes this university special. The festival offerings in the next 3 days include 7 concerts, 2 masterclasses, 2 paper sessions by 8 presenters, 15 different organists, and we are delighted to welcome visiting performers and presenters from Italy, Sweden, and the USA, in addition to our own faculty members from Eastman, and as well as the School of Arts and Sciences, and together with Nancy Norwood, the MAG's Curator of European Art. I'd like to acknowledge and thank several people. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Hans Davidson, David Higgs, and Bill Porter, who shared a vision for the
All right, is the mic on? Can you hear me? Yes? No? I know, I'll bring it closer. That's better, isn't it? Okay, yay, okay. Good evening. Good evening. And welcome to a year-long series of events celebrating the 10th anniversary of the installation of the Italian Baroque organ in the Fountain Court at the Memorial Art Gallery. My name is Honey McConey, and I'm Chair and Professor of Music in the College Music Department, Professor of Musicology at the Eastman School of Music, and Faculty Lead for the 10th anniversary celebrations. I'd like to note 3 things in my welcoming remarks. The first is a thank you to those who have so generously supported these anniversary events. First and foremost, the Humanities Project Office of the University of Rochester College of Arts, Science, and Engineering, our primary benefactor, but also the Memorial Art Gallery, the Eastman School of Music, and 2 departments therein, the Department of Organ, Sacred Music, and Historical Keyboard Instruments, and the Department of Musicology, and 4 departments of the College of Arts, Science, and Engineering, Art and Art History, Religion and Classics, History, and Music. And many individuals helped as well, including, and this is by no means a complete list, Nancy Norwood, David Higgs, Eduardo Bellotti, Nathan Manning of the historical milieu that generated it, and a comprehension of what music is best suited for it. This knowledge comes through research and scholarship, the tools of musicology. But that's just the first step before the organist performs. And organists are complete musicians in the way that no others are today. Organists do not simply play the notes as well as possible, as all musicians do. They improvise, they transpose, they read old clefs, they realize figured bass, they read scores, they arrange, they accompany, they vamp, they direct choirs, they switch seamlessly between performing as concert artists and guiding a congregation through the intricacies of liturgy. They provide the soundtrack to the joy of weddings and the solemnity of funerals. Every organist is a kind of mini J.S. Bach in their versatility and skill. We celebrate one specific organ this year, but we also celebrate the community of organists who add so much to our lives. So a huge personal thank you to all of you organists. I would like to turn now to a great supporter of Eastman's Department of Organ, Sacred Music, and Historical Keyboards, the Joan and Martin Messenger Dean of the Eastman School of Music, Jamal Rossi.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's very interesting to me that we're here to celebrate an organ. I feel like we're almost in church. Everybody's at the back of the house, so it somehow seems appropriate. So,
Lauba, Stephen Kennedy, the wonderful communications professionals of the Memorial Art Gallery, Eastman and the College, and especially the amazing Naomi Gregory. Naomi, could you stand up so we can admire you and clap and all this stuff? The second is to note how the organ serves not just as an instrument that produces music, but also as a symbol, metaphor, and catalyst for exploring art, history, culture, and performance. This year, it's a jumping-off point for discussing another anniversary, the publication of Frescobaldi's path-breaking Primo Libro di Cantate of 1615, for examining the role of music and the Jesuits in the New World, for understanding intonation, improvisation, and performance practice. Eastman's organ students will benefit from masterclasses with featured performers, but we have special programs as well for members of the University of Rochester Chamber Orchestra, college students of music theory, and undergraduates in history, religion and classics, and art history. This year's events were designed to demonstrate that our Italian Baroque organ is a window into many worlds. And lastly, I would like to pay a personal tribute to organists. First, as a musicologist, I would like to observe that every organist is a musicologist as well. And I can think of no higher words of praise. That's a joke, laugh. Because every organ is unique and requires for performance an understanding.
The Italian Baroque organ is not only a beautiful object in itself and a highlight to the Memorial Art Gallery's collection, it's also, I believe, a living demonstration of one of the things that I think makes Eastman a very special place. And that is the interaction of outstanding musical scholarship and outstanding musical performance. And I think this is summed up very well by the title of the weekend, Performing History, the Italian Baroque Organ and its Cultural Intersections. This instrument that we're going to celebrate this weekend has a long history of its own. And it was one of the earliest and most important projects in the Eastman Rochester Organ Initiative, or EROI. In the summer of 2005, the organ arrived in Rochester from Lithuania. I would tell you the same day that I arrived from South Carolina. And although it didn't arrive as a whole, it came in various pieces: pipes, bellows, keyboard, fascinating and decorative woodwork, and many painted details. Hans Davidson and a team of workers spent several months reassembling this treasure in all of its exquisite detail. When they finished in the early fall, Eastman became the only place in North America where one could give or hear historically informed performances of 18th century organ music on the kind of large Italian instrument for which it was written. David Higgs summed it up when he described the Italian Baroque organ shortly after its installation.